Network Dojo.
All right, next up in the FlexConnect world, we're looking at AAA overrides that we can do on the APs, as well as another feature that kind of goes along with it, and that is VLAN-based central switching. So our FlexConnect APs definitely support a number of different AAA overrides on them from an external radius server. On the centrally switched WLANs, I mean, it's all the same as what we saw in local mode APs, but specifically for locally switched WLANs, things that I know for a fact will work. We can do VLAN overrides, so send specific clients to specific VLANs, either by VLAN number or through the name, which is new in this code, or at least this version of the lab's code. We can also assign QoS profiles to the clients, FlexConnect ACLs, and rate limiting. All these are possible for locally switched WLANs. And then for centrally switched WLANs, I mean, the world's your oyster pretty much there. But we're going to focus primarily on VLAN overrides and then subsequently VLAN-based central switching here. So to support VLAN overrides, one important thing, the VLAN must be provisioned to the AP first. If the AP doesn't have the VLAN on it, a VLAN override to that VLAN will fail. And this is really no different than what we see on the controller for local mode APs. If I want to override someone to a particular VLAN, I need a dynamic interface for that VLAN, for a centrally switched WLAN. So same deal here. So we just need to know, how do we get VLANs onto our APs here? If we try to override onto a VLAN that doesn't exist, it'll just use the default VLAN assigned to the WLAN there. So there are a few different ways that VLANs are provisioned out to our FlexConnect mode APs. Number one, and I don't even know if I mentioned it here, but when we turn on VLAN support on our APs, we define a native VLAN for the AP. That native VLAN is provisioned out to the AP. It's aware of that VLAN number. When we do WLAN to VLAN mappings, any VLANs called out in the WLAN to VLAN mappings, doesn't matter whether it's through the WLAN specific FlexConnect or per AP. Any of those methods will get the VLAN out there. Now, not all of them are, it's not a summation of all those different things. It's whatever is ultimately applied to a given AP. So if a given AP uses only the WLAN mappings, it'll get those. If we override that on two of the WLANs with a FlexConnect group mapping, it'll learn one of the WLAN VLANs and then the FlexConnect group specific. Or if we just override everything on a per AP basis, those are the VLANs that we have. So it's the VLANs that are actually in use on the WLANs on that AP that are ultimately provisioned on that AP. It's not every method possible. It's the ones that are only in effect on that AP. But what if we need to do an override on a VLAN that is not the native VLAN and it's not defined through a WLAN to VLAN mapping? We can actually use the ACL mapping interface to provision a VLAN. It's just we're not going to call out an ACL as we use that. So this will work whether we're in central authentication or local external authentication. So these VLAN overrides will work in both cases. So it's not like we have to be in connected mode for this to work. As long as we're in a mode that leverages an external radius server, we can support the VLAN overrides. Now, normally we've historically always used VLAN numbers to override, but new in this version of the lab, we have things called VLAN templates that basically just map a name to a VLAN number. And once we use a VLAN template, we can call out the names with an aerospace interface name method. So we'll show you how to support that as well. All right, so I'll show you this and then we'll look at the VLAN-based central switching, but let's make sure that we understand this one first. So again, provisioning those VLANs out to the APs. If I look at, for instance, LAP1, I know that this AP knows about VLAN 106, so I could override someone to VLAN 106. I can also override them to 111, 113, and 112. It doesn't matter how the inheritance came about, it's just any number on this list here. So I have 4 different VLANs that this AP currently knows about. And on a iOS-based AP, basically not an 1800, I can easily see it on the AP's CLI as well, if I ever wanted to check there. If I do a show IP and brief, If I look at the Ethernet interface, the sub-interface number matches the VLAN number. So I can see here, oh, yep, it knows about 106, 111, 112, and 113. I should be able to, I think, do a show VLANs as well. Ignore VLAN 1. And unfortunately, we get these other VLAN numbers assigned to the radio interfaces, but once we get past these, there we go. So 106, 111, 112. Let's see do we get this on an LAP? Can we even use this command on a 1800 series AP? Nope. And show IP in brief doesn't give us the sub interfaces. Show interfaces. Boy, they don't make it easy. Yeah. So we're not going to really see it on the AP. I mean, maybe there's a command, I just don't know it. But we can always look in the GUI, look at these numbers, and deduce which VLANs this AP can support. All right, but if I want to override, let's say I wanted to override to VLAN 115. How do I get that provisioned out in the absence of changing one of these numbers here? Well, that's through the FlexConnect group. ACL mapping. And what we're going to choose, we'll just say the VLAN number that we want to provision, and then we'll leave the ACLs set to none. So we're not going to provision an ACL, but this actually provisions the VLAN. Pop over here. So anything on this list is additionally provisioned, whether it has a VLAN, or sorry, whether it has an ACL assigned to it or not. Any numbers on this list here would be provisioned out to the AP. And if I go back to LAP1, I'd see a new interface. There we go. So that's how we provision APs out when they're not naturally the native VLAN or assigned to a WLAN. Now, any of those VLANs I can do an override to by number. So if let's go ahead and make this work. So on ICE, let's create real quick an authorization profile if I don't already have one for it that assigns clients to VLAN 115. And so I just go to common tasks, I type in the number 115, so the numerical method, which this is what we actually respond with, but I'm calling it out by number, not by name. And then I'll just create a rule up on top. I'll make it pretty easy. This is very generic, but it's just to get it to work real quick. I'm just going to say if you're in the ICE group 1 group, I will send the VLAN override. Now, I do want to make sure that the WLAN in question has AAA override enabled. Still need that. Let's turn that on. Okay, so now when I connect up to a FlexConnect AP, or any AP actually on this WLAN, I'm going to get a AAA override for VLAN 115. My FlexConnect mode AP should support VLAN 115, and we'll see if it works. Let's make sure that I delete that, because I have a feeling I was still set for EAP-TLS, so start it fresh here. So I'll do PEEP. ICE user 1, which is in that group. All right, we passed our auth. The only question is going to be, which AP did I get put onto? And I got on LAP5, which is the only AP that doesn't support this VLAN, so thanks a lot. Let me just disable LAP5. LAP5, there is no VLAN 115 where it exists, and so that's one place where I'm just out of luck in this example, but let's move over to another AP here. This time I should actually be able to pull an IP address. There we go. So this time I connected up to LAP1. I was placed in VLAN 115, so I pulled a 10.1.5 address here, thanks to provisioning out that VLAN through the FlexConnect group. Okay. So that would be a numerical VLAN override. As long as we're reaching out to a radio server, it works in central auth, it works in local external auth. All right, what about those VLAN names? Let's show you what it takes to support that. So here we're going to need to create a FlexConnect VLAN template. And I'll call it CCIE. But the templates, again, basically just map a number to a name. So I'm going to create a new mapping. So I'll call the name, I'll say, whatever, I'll call it Jeff. Let's say that Jeff maps to 115. Apply. And I would just repeat this. So whatever VLANs overrides I want to do based off of a name rather than just a number, I would create, I would add to the list here. And so I guess in the lab, they would either just call out one VLAN or they would maybe have a table that maps numbers to names. But at the end of the day, that's all we have, names and numbers. And we still need to provision the VLAN by number. It's just now, when it receives a VLAN name, or actually it's an aerospace interface name, it looks to see, okay, does this name map to a VLAN number? We're going to try to assign them to that VLAN number, but that VLAN must still be provisioned out to the AP. This in and of itself does not provision VLAN numbers to the APs. So if I didn't have VLAN 115 already provisioned to my AP, this would not do it for me. I would still need to use the other method for that. Once I get everything the way that I want, notice that it says status modified. I have to hit apply all. Now it says status applied. That's what we want. I'm going to go in my FlexConnect group. This VLAN template name here, I'm just going to choose the template. Apply. Okay, so now the template's been pushed out to my APs. And I should be able to now reference the VLAN name, which again is more, actually it's an aerospace interface name, is what we're specifying in the radio server side of things, but I don't have to call out the number now, I can call out the name. So let's go ahead and make the change on my radio server here. So let's add, call it Jeff interface. This I have to do an advanced one, so whoops, not Cisco. I want airspace. Okay, so we would do the airspace interface name method, and I think I called it Jeff. So now if I say interface Jeff, that would map to VLAN 115. So let's submit this. And then I'm going to update my rule so that now, edit, returns the new profile here. What are we looking for? Jeff interface. Done. Save. All right, so let me disconnect. Make sure that my client is purged. It is. So let's reconnect. And I should still be placed onto VLAN 115, but this time through the other mechanism. And once it's all done, we'll just verify in the radio server that indeed it sent the new override. This time it wants to take its time, I guess. There we go. So again, placed onto VLAN 115, pulled my IP address there. If we look at the live logs, we see the last time I was hitting a rule that matched the VLAN 115 override. This time I hit the rule that matched the Jeff interface override. The AP was able to translate the name to the VLAN number. The VLAN number existed, hence it was able to put me onto that VLAN. So why even bother with the extra step of using a name rather than a number? Well, if the lab tells you to do it, you do it. But in the real world, usually the reason for this is that we might have, let's say, 10 different sites. And in 10 different sites, we have different VLANs there, but we have, the VLANs that are there are for similar purposes on every site. So maybe there's an IT VLAN in every site, and an engineering VLAN at every site, and this and that. And so we have, they're different numbers in each site, but for similar purposes in each site. And so if I was just using numbers, I would have to create, say there was 5 VLANs in each site, I would have to create 5 times 10, potentially, VLAN override rules inside of here, because the end result is a different result if I'm using numbers. But if I have if I name them the same, I could say, override them to the IT VLAN, override them to the engineering VLAN, and each site has a different name to number mapping. It makes my policy writing in your radius server much easier when we do it that way. So that's kind of the use case usually for a name rather than a number. But that's what it takes to make that work. And that's a new feature in this version of the lab here, using the name with the VLAN templates. All right, so that's getting the VLAN overrides working. Now that we kind of understand how to make a VLAN override work, let's use that in this next technology here. And that's going to be VLAN-based central switching. So this is the first technology that we're going to look at that allows us to, on an individual WLAN, have some traffic centrally switched and some traffic locally switched. Up until now, it's an all or nothing. Either everything's centrally switched on the WLAN, or everything's locally switched on the WLAN, at least assuming that we have a FlexConnect AP in play. Now we can have a WLAN on a FlexConnect AP that some clients are centrally switched and some clients are locally switched based off of the VLAN that you assign those clients onto. So once we turn on this feature, it's configured under the WLAN. Here's how it's going to work. We are going to have the iServer send some sort of a result. If it just sends a regular permit and there's no VLAN override enabled, the client is locally switched on the normally assigned VLAN. So whatever the WLAN to VLAN mapping is, they're placed onto that VLAN. Just like normal. Nothing's different than a normal local switch scenario at this point. Now, if we start sending VLAN overrides, if the VLAN that we override the client to is supported and provisioned on the AP, we locally switch the client on that VLAN. So for instance, I've been putting clients on VLAN 115. If I enable VLAN-based central switching and I override clients onto VLAN 115, the AP supports it and it will drop it off locally on VLAN 115. But here's the last scenario. If we override to a non-supported VLAN, which I don't think I have VLAN 114 provisioned out to my APs. And so if I override my client onto VLAN 114, the AP can't support it, and rather than just putting it back on the default VLAN, it actually centrally switches that client up to the controller. So any non-supported VLANs or non-provisioned VLANs on the AP cause the client to be centrally switched up to the controller on that WLAN. Now, once it's centrally switched to the controller, the question is going to be, can the controller support that VLAN? If the controller has an interface with that VLAN, it will place the client onto that VLAN, and they'll pull an IP address in that VLAN and use that VLAN in a central switch fashion. If the controller does not have an interface associated with that VLAN, we still keep it centrally switched, but the controller assigns it to the interface assigned to the WLAN. So, a few different scenarios. Let's map it out again. So assuming that we're doing a VLAN override, the first stage gate is, does the AP support that VLAN? So in other words, is it on the native VLAN, one of these VLANs, or any VLANs called out on this list? If so, the AP supports that VLAN and it will locally switch the client on that VLAN. If it's a different VLAN than one of these that's on the list, the AP cannot support it and it will centrally switch it up to the controller. So does the controller have an interface on the VLAN? If so, the controller assigns the client to that interface and the client is operating on the VLAN assigned. If the controller does not have that interface, the controller will assign the client to whatever interface is assigned to the WLAN in the WLAN config. And so if I did a VLAN override to VLAN 200, it's not provisioned out to the APs and the controller doesn't have an interface for VLAN 200. So because it's not provisioned on the AP, we centrally switch it. And because the controller doesn't support it, it's going to apply the client to, in this case, VLAN 111, because that's the interface associated with the WLAN. So that's the logic flow with VLAN-based central switching. We turn it on in the FlexConnect section, VLAN-based central switching. It does require AAA override to be enabled and FlexConnect local switching to be enabled. Those are sort of the two dependencies there. All right, so now that we have that, if I had reauthed, right now I'm being overridden onto VLAN 115. The AP supports VLAN 115, so I'm being locally switched on VLAN 115. How do you know if you're being locally switched or centrally switched? Well, you can actually see it in your client statistics. So we'll wait for this to complete here. There we go. It's acquiring IP address. Should be on VLAN 115. There we go. If I look at my client stats on the controller, over on the right-hand side, we see the data switching is local, auth is central, so that's central auth local switch. So exactly what I would expect. And if I went over to the switch port on LAP3, I would see the client MAC address on that switch port. All right, so now let's try to do a VLAN override to a VLAN that I have not provisioned out to the AP. So I will do VLAN 114. It's configured on the controller, but it shouldn't be provisioned out to the APs. So I'll create the override on ICE, update that rule. There we go, 114, done. Save, let's go ahead and reconnect. Now, because the APs don't support it, I'll be centrally switched, but the controller does have an interface for VLAN 114. I will be placed onto VLAN 114 and pull an IP address there. And once we validate that, we'll update it one last time, do an override to a VLAN that nothing has any idea about. We'll see I'm centrally switched, and then I'll be placed on VLAN 111 because that's what the WLAN is configured for in the global config. All right. It's connected. Look at the client stats. Hasn't pulled its IP address yet, but we can see that we are centrally switched and placed onto VLAN 114. So it's just a matter of time before it just pulls its IP address here. There we go, and it did. So 10.14.151. Okay, perfect. So VLAN-based central switching. I had it working where I was locally switched. I have it working where I'm centrally switched on the same WLAN. One last thing. Final authorization profile. We'll call it VLAN 200. Update the rule real quick. So now we'll have Radius send them to VLAN 200. We'll disconnect. We'll reconnect. And this time we should end up on 111 because that's what's mapped to the WLAN. You be quiet. All right, there we go. Finish this off. Doesn't have its IP address yet, but that's okay. So we're centrally switched and 111. So we were trying to be overridden to a VLAN ID of 200, but we were assigned to VLAN 111. And we pulled an IP address in VLAN 111. So there's kind of all the permutations with VLAN-based central switching. So the first mechanism we have to have mixtures of clients, both centrally switched and locally switched, on the same WLAN on a FlexConnect mode AP. So there would be supporting VLAN overrides of numbers and names. The corollary, the next feature then, VLAN-based central switching. Understand how all that works. Definitely hot topics when it comes to the lab.